All right,
Okay.
looks like we're back up and running. Thanks, Anneke. Government whip whenever you're ready.
Three, two, one. I think both opening opposition in the POI and closing opposition while not engaging miss the crucial part of this debate. The Black Sea territory will always be controversial and no one wants to back down from there, which means that since US already currently giving the arms and military invest in the Ukraine and trying to stop the Russia, it's unclear why you will not cross this red line and why you will give up for the trading and strategic spot, which if Russia consecutively get in the higher, will have massive power and then will be much harder to stop them in the future. I think the problem in this debate is that everyone is saying that they are supporting Ukraine potentially, that they are still giving them a little bit of help, but never engaging fully because they don't want to escalate things with the Russia. There's unclear for me while in opening opposition the situation will ever change in this particular region. They always want to have the situation of hybrid warfare, massive destabilization, massive disinformation, which affect the life of people currently, not only when you will escalate the conflict and create the casualties. The difference between the border conflict which happened between Poland and Belarus and which is happening with Ukraine and Russia, is Poland has much bigger capacity to stand there and protect the small piece of land which was happening near to the Białystok where Przemek was living before the move to Harvard, which means that you have the concentrated one place, you already have support from NATO, you already have support of the political backsliding of presidents from the Baltic states calling NATO to help them because they are no longer able to protect the eastern wall before the Russian expansion and in order for them to collecting more and more land every year. With the Donbas, the situation was the same, right? No one was reacting preemptively and later we were like, oh no, it's too late, it's too much, like Russia have too much leverage over us. In this particular situation, if you are saying to Ukraine, we would let you to the NATO, but you have too big corruption, but we will still military support you. It's exactly the lack of trust which is based closing opposition extension, right? How Zelensky can convince the people that Western will protect them, that they don't need to be under the Russian ruling, that they don't need to give them Crimea, that they don't need to give them Donbas, that they don't need to share them their economy. If the only thing which we can get is like, oh yeah, US sometimes sending us the military, but no one officially support us in the international area and no one will create like the step higher in order to protect us. Therefore, I think the criteria against Ukraine are artificial, but second of all, the geography and the location of Ukraine is incredibly important, right? You are unable currently to democratize Belarus. You are unable to make successful movements. The only analysis from OO is we have Tikhanovska, we have the opposition against the Belarus. What that brings to us so far, right? There's absolutely no increasing the situation or protection over Russia or decreasing the Russian power in this particular area. Comparatively, what's happening now on the Ukrainian border is Russia again checking the incentives from the NATO and official media. Russian politicians are like, we never invaded Ukraine and we are not planning, only if we'll be provoking. But that sort of provocation doesn't sort out all of the deterrence which opposition analyzed to us, where Russia will not create the military intervention currently. However, since the situation will be escalating in the long term, even if we will not approve the Ukraine now, that still will be the tipping point, that still is the strategic geographical location between Europe and between the Russia and their place of the sphere of influence, which is such an incredibly important. That's why this extension is so crucial. It's so basic. Like if you look for the map, where's the Black Sea, if you see who is interested in the area, who was interested in the last 20 years, you know that no one will give up this territory. You know that there will be always escalation against the Russia. And it's unclear for me why that will be the tipping point and why we can prevent and prepare for the future. But second of all, fulfilling the obligation and not letting the eastern wall and this particular part in order to other countries covering the cost for this. Because for example, Poland, who is the member of the NATO, was sending the army and helping on the border when the Donbas was attacked, which means that one way or another, the NATO will be still involved in protecting that sort of nations. But why only the countries who are close in the proximity should take the burden of this, taking later the migrants who are living from this particular areas, it's unclear for me. Therefore, it's strategically more important in order to stand that there's no longer ability to be under the threat and Russia creating the particular invasion, but you are literally reacting in the first spot. But second of all, how many troops is Ukraine capable to put against 100 troops that Russia is creating with their specific tactics and specific plans to threaten potential the invasion, right? It's only escalating and only increasing their incentive to show that they are much more powerful, the whole Western bloc, and they are still can create the narrative, which is literally the response to the extension from closing opposition, right? About the trust between Zelensky, about the opposition, and how the narrative within the political scene look there. Currently, they have no Russia support because they are literally being invaded by them. They have no economic ties. They are literally under the danger. And on the other hand, they have no guarantee, nothing getting back from the West, which can push them in order to join, which can guarantee the better and safer support of this particular region. That's why this extension is incredibly important. Before I move on, opening opposition.
Member of opposition says Ukraine has been trying to join for 13 years. They're still far from meeting the conditions. This means that expedition doesn't mean they join tomorrow. They join in 8 years instead of 12. Neither government team has the urgent benefits they want to deliver. They have them when Putin already dies. I'm not sure why I care about a gov bench.
I don't think that if this motion would be main justification which Biden is giving to Ukraine, why they can only partially support them is, oh, because you are corrupt, you need to first deal with your corruption. I think the urgency in terms of what sort of consequences can come if you will not react, if you will not try to help with the political situation, are much more severe than the corruption. Second of all, specifically, if you don't create like immediate outcomes, there is also no drama with like 2% of GDP spending. It's mostly how you are perceiving yourself against Russia. Current situation in real politics, it's like you have one country who is dictating to the whole Western bloc what they need to do. If we will put the troop there, then you should all get away because we might maybe attack the other state. But if you are putting the same proportionate power and showing that you will not have a free pass and you can escalate whoever will come to power after the Putin or whatever the situation or what sort of small escalation in terms of disinformation is happening there, I wanted to point out that this is extremely problematic when you are sending the spies on the border, when you're invigilating people with the drones, when you are melting in the political process and no one is capable to react because you're only seeing the bad guys there and you are not seeing any opposition which is on your borders or which is even officially giving you the support. This is the same when like UN or some other organization say, oh yeah, we urge Russia to stop the aggression. We are only talking, we are not doing anything. Since US and everyone will still put money to Ukraine, still want to help and don't want to leave the area, the conflict will be constant and only escalating. Therefore, this is the right thing to expand the NATO presence in the region. CG.
I'd like to thank the government whip for that speech, and I invite the opposition whip to conclude this debate. Hear, hear.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Fantastic. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, it feels like people in this debate were mostly trying to use their authority to back up claims without any analysis. I won't do that. The reasoning why we win does not require me giving us any benefit of doubt. Our extension is in fact very simple. First, even if Russia will not increase the intensity of their war efforts, will not constitute even more severe threat than it constitutes right now, it will destabilize Ukraine in other ways if we expedite the application process. And that is the reason as to why we should not do that. Second, the government failed to establish what is the exact benefit of joining NATO. We say that because of the internal divisions within NATO, any kind of benefit is very, very much questionable. I'm going to first talk about the opening opposition very briefly, and then for the whole case of the government side. When it comes to the opening opposition, look, there is no doubt OO proved a lot of stuff. But our extension stands regardless of some of the possible deadlocks in this debate. So in the top half, there was huge back and forth if Russia is going to invade, if Russia is actually going to increase the intensity of the war effort. We win regardless of how panel you resolve that clash. We say that even if the application is expedited and Russia does not move their military, the red line doesn't exist, other bad things happen. It means increased polarization because there is a huge portion of Russian population, so a huge portion of Ukrainian population that is not particularly fond of NATO, and they're going to, basically be vocal with their criticism. It means huge threat of a security breach because the increased communication between NATO and Ukraine is going to obviously mean that there is going to be a higher incentive for Russia to engage in different security breaches. And it is possible because note panel that Ukraine is a country that has military, that has been literally trained during the times of the Soviet Union. Ukraine is a very corrupt country. So this is a significant thing. And then obviously it means possible tensions with the Russian minority. This is disinformation, spread of fake news, which are obviously somewhat present in the status quo, but are so much more likely to increase if the stake is higher for Russia, because now Ukraine is obviously going to be tied more to NATO, as well as if the possibility of that being successful is higher, because there is going to be a huge portion of the population not happy with that. As a result of that, we win against opening opposition, because regardless whether there is going to be, greater war effort, we are still proving why it empowers Russia. And second of all, we win against opening opposition, because even if there is absolutely best case scenario for the government side, when they constitute, there is a real threat from Russia right now, and NATO has capacity to intervene. We explain why NATO is not going to intervene. Going to the opening government. So I think that there is, or actually the government as a whole, I think that there is a couple of questions that we need to deal with. So in my question to Prime Minister, I asked what is the urgency, not agency. I think it was misunderstood, but this question is really important. The war is ongoing. Crimea is annexed. The situation is already bad. They need to prove, as the whole government side, why they can feasibly solve that situation, or why that situation would get worse if we don't join NATO. I think that it is not going to get worse because of the analysis that they provided. They say the main reason for the ongoing intervention is having a buffer, that Ukraine is currently invaded because it's a buffer. If that's the case, it means Russia doesn't need anything else other than Crimea and the currently occupied territories of Donbass. You prove yourself, government proves themselves that there is no reason for Russia to invade any further. Second of all, they also say Russia is weak economically, struggles with galvanizing political support. Probably increasing war effort would mean the need for money and political support is greater. You say themselves that Russia does not have that. I think that there is a lot of back and forth, but ultimately OG is incredibly bad in proving that Russia has any significant interest in engaging in a higher intensity war. The reasons they give justify why Russia might mingle with Ukraine and sustain the existing conflict, or even increase that conflict through other means, non-military means, the ones we say are going to happen, but not why they will extend these military means. As such, they don't build the case for joining NATO. There is another burden that the government side has. So I think that the closing government is doing a slightly better job in establishing why Ukraine is currently vulnerable, why there might be a threat from Russia. I think that they don't do a great job when it comes to explaining why NATO is going to be of any help. So the crux of the case of CG is that Ukraine is vulnerable and people are not really reacting. Fair. The problem is that they never prove something will change. First of all, as pointed by OO, both in their speeches as well as in the POIs, they don't have the fiat to say we can tomorrow have Ukraine in NATO and deploy 50,000 soldiers there. So second, they need to prove that NATO will provide any kind of sensible help. We think that given that currently NATO and the EU fund the Ukrainian military, help them in other ways, the only way to help Ukraine would be triggering Article 50 and significantly increasing help, or at least creating a sustainable threat, a credible threat that NATO might do that. Let's take them at their best. Let's assume that threat is real. What they prove is NATO has capacity to help. That is obviously the definition of, what is Article 50, but they don't ever prove that this is going to happen. They never prove that this is actually going to happen. We think that it is extremely unlikely. Here are the reasons why. First of all, lots of members don't give a shit about Ukraine. They're not going to be happy that they need to engage more resources, that they need to, adjust their foreign policies because of Ukraine. Countries such as Canada or even the US are not really interested in what's going on in Ukraine unless, this is going to constitute a significant threat for them. Second of all, they will obviously have to supply more resources, which they might be unable to, especially while handling energy crisis. Third of all, lots of countries don't want a worse relationship with Russia. The primary member of NATO not wanting that worse relationship with Russia is obviously Germany, because of the economic interest that they have, because of the dependency on energy that they have. Fourth of all, NATO is divided. Turkey has a close relationship with Russia. Lots of members don't want to spend 2%, and so on and so forth. In general, lots of countries are not galvanized enough around that cause to provide any sort of support. So I don't think that CG is doing a great job in proving that there is going to be any significant benefit from joining NATO. And lastly, I don't think that they prove any reason as to why this threat is going to increase. So throughout my speech, I was taking them at their best and assuming that there is a credible threat from Russia that basically is going to, is going to increase. But I want to deal with that. They say in Josh's speech that joining NATO is not a red line. I think that this is qualitatively different from all the other elements that he talked about in his speech, and it is a red line for 3 reasons. First of all, Article 5 and perception around this is really, really important. It is perfectly plausible to say that this is a red line, even though there are adjacent actions being taken right now, because this sets a precedent, and this is something that has never happened before. This sends a very clear message. That is to say that all of this means that there is a huge threat of Russia intervening. And even though Judge was showing off a lot with random facts, it still did not create a believable case as to why Russia would intervene. I think that the call in this debate is very simple. The government is definitely out.
Cool. I'd like to thank the opposition whip for that speech. I know it's over